Identity first, habits second. Who you are creates what you do. Written by Ronnie Rowland. Published by Growth Literacy Lounge. Identity is the soil, not the fruit. Try planting roses in concrete. You can water them, expose them to sunlight, even speak life into their leaves. But unless the soil changes, nothing lasting will grow. Too many people approach self-improvement this way. They pour effort into behaviors while ignoring the environment that sustains them, their identity. It's why gyms fill up in January and empty by March. Why journals are bought with excitement and abandoned before page 10. The issue isn't laziness or lack of desire. It's misalignment. Most habit change advice focuses on what to do, but transformation that sticks begins with who you are. Identity isn't just upstream of action. It creates action. It is the soil from which habits grow. Behavior follows belief. As Zig Ziglar once said, you cannot consistently perform in a manner which is inconsistent with the way you see yourself. It's not discipline alone that keeps someone showing up at 5 a.m., it's the story they've embraced. I'm an athlete. I honor my body. That belief doesn't just push them forward. It pulls them. This book is not about hacks. It's about alignment. Over the next 11 chapters, you won't be asked to force yourself into better habits. You'll be invited to become the kind of person for whom those habits feel natural. Easy. Even inevitable. Because when identity leads, habits follow, and lasting change doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like coming home. Chapter 1. The invisible script that shapes everything. There's a reason icebergs sink ships. It's not the part you can see, it's the part beneath the surface. In the same way, most people try to change their lives by chipping away at the visible tip, behavior. They set goals, track habits, download apps, and make plans. But the unseen part, the identity, remains unchanged. Eventually, what's underneath drags everything down. Beneath every habit is a quiet script, often unnoticed but always active. This is who I am. It's not spoken out loud. It's buried in the assumptions we make and the labels we accept. I'm just not a morning person. I've always been bad with money. I'm not the disciplined type. These aren't just thoughts. They're operating systems. A person who tries to run every morning but still believes deep down that they're not a runner will feel resistance every step. Not because running is hard, but because it contradicts the story they're living. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. When actions and identity conflict, the tension eventually resolves by retreating into the familiar self. But identity can work for you just as powerfully as it works against you. A study published in the journal Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin found that people who framed their goals around identity, I am someone who cares about the environment, were significantly more consistent than those who focused on tasks I will recycle more. Why? Because identity shifts change the question. It's no longer what should I do, but who am I becoming? Behavior is not random. It's an echo of identity. A child who's told they're smart will often seek out challenges to validate it. Another child labeled troublemaker may unconsciously perform that role into adulthood. Labels are powerful not because they describe us, but because we begin to act in accordance with them. Consider two people offered a cigarette. One says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." The other says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." The difference is subtle, but defining. One is resisting a behavior. The other has already become someone new. This is why most resolutions fail. They ask for change at the action level, not the identity level. A diet can help someone lose weight, but unless they begin to see themselves as someone who values health, the old habits return like gravity. Real change isn't behavior modification, it's identity evolution. Transformation isn't behavior stapled to willpower. It's behavior flowing from belief. The truth is, you're always becoming something. Every decision is a vote. Every choice is a brushstroke in the portrait of who you believe you are. The question isn't if you're building an identity. The question is, are you doing it on purpose? This book is an invitation to live from the inside out. To flip the script. To stop taping apples onto pine branches and instead become the kind of tree that naturally produces the fruit you want to see. You don't need to fix your habits. You need to know who you are. And if that feels unclear right now, that's okay. Over the next pages, you'll learn how to strip away old scripts, clarify a truer identity, and begin casting daily votes for the kind of person you were meant to be. Because when you become someone new, new actions follow. They have no choice. Behavior is an extension of identity, not the other way around. Most people fail to change because they ignore the invisible script. Who do I believe I am? Every action reinforces or reshapes identity. Small choices aren't just actions, they're declarations. What labels, spoken by others or silently accepted, might be shaping your habits today? Write down one identity you want to embody. I am a disciplined person, and cast a small vote for it today, no matter how tiny. Chapter 2: You become what you rehearse. Before a violinist steps on stage at Carnegie Hall, they've already performed the concert 1,000 times, in practice rooms, in their mind, in muscle memory. Mastery isn't the result of a single grand moment. It's the consequence of quiet repetition. And the same is true of identity. Who you are isn't set in stone. It's shaped by what you practice, what you repeat, and what you reinforce, consciously or not. Identity isn't fixed. It's fluid, formed by pattern. And habits are simply rehearsals of who you're becoming. The problem is, most people rehearse by accident. They don't mean to become stressed, reactive, or distracted. But day after day, without realizing it, they reinforce those traits through repetition. Every time they reach for their phone in boredom, skip a workout, or speak negatively about themselves, they're casting votes for a certain identity. Not because they want that identity, but because repetition doesn't require intention, it just requires consistency. The brain is efficient. It builds pathways out of repetition to conserve energy. The more often you think a thought or take an action, the more automatic it becomes. Neuroscientists call this process neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on experience. In simple terms, what fires together, wires together. So if you repeatedly act like someone who is overwhelmed, disorganized, or unreliable, your brain builds that into your wiring. Not because it's true, but because it's familiar. But the inverse is also true, and this is where hope lives. Small, intentional actions are powerful not because of the outcome they produce today, but because of the identity they rehearse for tomorrow. A single journal entry won't make you an author. But it's a vote for the identity. I am someone who writes. A single glass of water isn't a health breakthrough. But it confirms, I care about my body. You are rehearsing someone always. A study in the European Journal of Social Psychology found that new habits take an average of 66 days to feel automatic. But the number varied widely. Some people formed habits in 18 days, others in over 200. What made the difference wasn't willpower. It was alignment. The closer the habit was to the person's desired identity, the more natural it became. This is why forcing habits rarely works long-term. If you're white-knuckling your way through change, it's often a signal that your actions and identity aren't aligned. It's like rowing against the current. You might move forward for a while, but it's exhausting and unsustainable. The key isn't more effort. It's more alignment. Decide who you want to become, then start rehearsing that identity in small, specific ways. Let your life become a dress rehearsal for the future version of you. Not through grand declarations, but through quiet repetition. You don't need to change everything overnight. You just need to practice being the person you want to be, until it becomes second nature. Because identity isn't just a decision. It's a pattern. And you get to choose the pattern. The world will try to define you by your past. But your past is just rehearsal. It doesn't have to be the final performance. Today, you get to start practicing something new. Identity is not fixed, it's formed through repetition. Every action is a rehearsal of who you're becoming. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be consistent in the direction of who you want to be. What habits, small or unnoticed, are you currently rehearsing, and what identity are they reinforcing? Choose one action you can repeat daily for the next week that aligns with the identity you want to build. Schedule it now. Chapter 3: The Identity Gap. There's a tension that lives between who you are and who you believe you could be. Most people feel it, even if they don't name it, a quiet discomfort, like wearing a shirt that doesn't quite fit. That tension is the identity gap. It's the space between your current self-concept and your desired self. And if left unexamined, it becomes a trap. You know what you want: to be focused, healthy, creative, disciplined. But if your inner narrative still whispers that you're scattered, lazy, inconsistent, or unmotivated, then every habit you try to build will feel like a lie. The behaviors and the beliefs are fighting each other. In that gap, self-sabotage thrives. You start to go to the gym but feel out of place, like you're pretending. You sit down to write but tell yourself it won't be good. You plan your meals, only to hear the echo of an old story: you never stick to things. These aren't external obstacles. They're internal contradictions. A study from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people with high self-concept clarity, those who had a stable sense of who they were more likely to persist in difficult tasks, experience lower stress, and exhibit better self-regulation. It wasn't ability that made the difference. It was internal alignment. The identity gap weakens resolve because it introduces friction. When your actions contradict your self-image, you subconsciously pull back. Not because you don't want to change, but because you don't yet believe it's you. The mind naturally resists inauthenticity. This is why forcing habits without addressing identity feels hollow. The outside may change temporarily, but the inside eventually wins. The story we believe about ourselves always finds a way to come true. But the gap doesn't have to be a void. It can be a bridge. Instead of ignoring it or trying to leap across it in a single jump, you can build it slowly, habit by habit, vote by vote. Each action becomes a plank laid across the space between who you've been and who you're becoming. You don't close the gap by declaring a new identity. You close it by proving it, consistently in small ways. And here's the key: you don't have to believe the whole news story yet. You just have to act like someone who does. Behavior is the training ground for belief. Consider the person who wants to become confident. Confidence isn't a switch they flip. It's built through showing up scared, again and again, until one day fear doesn't hold the same power. Or the person who wants to become disciplined. They don't wait to feel disciplined. They act as if they are. And over time, the identity catches up. You are not a fraud for walking toward a better version of yourself. You are becoming. And every small act of alignment weakens the old narrative and strengthens the new one. One less skipped workout. One more page written. One fewer moment of self-criticism. These are not just tasks. They are identity builders. The gap may still exist. But you're not stuck in it anymore. You're building your way across. The identity gap is the space between who you are and who you believe you can become. Change fails when new actions conflict with old beliefs. You don't close the gap with declarations, you close it with daily proof. What old story are you still carrying that might be widening the gap between your habits and your identity? Take one small action today that bridges the identity gap, something your future self would already be doing. Chapter 4: The Mirror Lies Both Ways. Stand in front of a funhouse mirror, and your reflection warps. Taller, wider, distorted. But if you didn't know better, you might believe what you saw. For many, identity works the same way. It's not formed by truth, it's formed by repetition, feedback, and unchallenged perception. The mirror lies both ways. It exaggerates your flaws or inflates your ego. Either way, it rarely shows you who you really are. We all carry mirrors handed to us by parents, teachers, friends, failures, and even fleeting comments from strangers. You're so forgetful. You're not athletic. You're the smart one, not the creative one. These may seem harmless, but over time, reflections become reality. What starts as someone else's opinion slowly morphs into your identity. The brain is designed to confirm what it already believes. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, the tendency to seek, interpret, and recall information that supports your existing self-concept. If you believe you're bad at relationships, you'll notice every awkward interaction. If you think you're undisciplined, every missed workout feels like proof. The mirror confirms what the mind already suspects. But here's what's rarely said: just as identity can be shaped by distortion, it can be reshaped by design. Your self-image is not a fact. It's a story. And like any story, it can be edited, rewritten, refined. A study published in Psychological Science found that people who visualize themselves as successful in future tasks, especially when paired with action, performed significantly better than those who focused only on goals or outcomes. Seeing yourself as capable isn't just motivational fluff. It's a neurologically supported strategy. The brain begins to map behavior that matches the imagined identity. So what if the mirror you've been using is broken? What if you're not undisciplined, you've just rehearsed avoidance? What if you're not bad with money, you've simply never been taught a system? What if your identity isn't a fixed reflection but a fluid possibility? This isn't delusion. It's direction. Choosing a new identity isn't about ignoring the past. It's about refusing to let it be the only evidence admitted into the courtroom of your mind. You can choose to hold a better mirror. One that reflects not just who you've been, but who you're capable of becoming. It starts with small confirmations. You don't need to feel like a leader to take initiative. You don't need to feel confident to speak up. You don't need to feel creative to sit down and make something. These actions don't wait for identity. They build it. Eventually, the reflection changes. Not because the mirror tells you something new, but because you do. Identity becomes believable through consistency. And over time, the distorted mirror breaks. You no longer live in reaction to someone else's opinion. You live in alignment with who you've proven yourself to be. The world is full of broken mirrors. But the truest one is built, not inherited. It's made from your decisions, your resilience, your quiet daily votes for a better self. You're not bound to the image you were given. You're free to craft the one you need. Identity is often shaped by distorted reflections from others. The brain confirms what it already believes, whether true or not. You can reshape identity by choosing a new reflection and backing it with action. Whose mirror are you still holding on to, and what would it look like to replace it with your own? Write one sentence that describes the person you're becoming. Speak it out loud today, then act in alignment with it once, no matter how small. Chapter 5. Action is identity in motion. A river doesn't announce where it's going. It just moves, and by moving, it shapes the land around it. In the same way, your actions carve the path of your identity, not the other way around. Identity may begin as belief, but it becomes real through movement. Action is identity in motion. The mistake many people make is waiting until they feel like the person they want to become before they act like them. They assume confidence must come before speaking up, or discipline must precede consistency. But identity doesn't wait for certainty. It forms through evidence. You don't need to feel like a writer to write. You write, and eventually, the act becomes part of who you are. Consider a bricklayer building a wall. Each brick is small, insignificant on its own. But layer by layer, something permanent takes shape. Habits are the bricks. Actions are the mortar. And over time, the wall becomes your identity. You become someone new, not by force, but by proof. The psychological principle behind this is known as self-perception theory. Coined by psychologist Daryl Baim, it suggests that people develop their attitudes by observing their own behavior. In other words, you learn who you are by watching what you do. This explains why small wins matter. They send messages to the self. I show up. I follow through. I do hard things. Every action carries a silent message. Skipping the workout says, I'm someone who quits. Finishing it says, I'm someone who follows through. Neither one is absolute. Neither one defines you. But every time you choose, you're nudging the story in one direction or the other. This is why passivity is so dangerous. It doesn't just delay results, it corrodes identity. When you continually avoid doing the things aligned with who you want to become, you begin to doubt the possibility that you could ever become that person. But action, even imperfect, inconsistent, messy action, keeps the identity alive. It keeps the river moving. There's a story about a man who wanted to become an artist but felt unworthy of the title. So instead of waiting until he felt ready, he committed to drawing something, anything, every day. At first, it was awkward. His lines were shaky. His ideas scattered. But he kept going. After a few months, a friend introduced him and said, "This is the artist I was telling you about." And for the first time, he didn't correct them. He had become what he practiced. Not because he achieved perfection, but because he showed up often enough to believe the story was true. You don't need to take massive action to shift identity. You need to take consistent action. Small steps done regularly are louder than big steps done occasionally. The person who jogs for 5 minutes every morning will become a runner long before the person who sprints once a month with high intentions and no pattern. Identity is not declared. It's demonstrated. You don't have to wait to feel like the person you want to be. Just take one small action today that aligns with that version of yourself. Let it be clumsy. Let it be simple. But let it be real. Because once you move, the river starts carving. And that's when everything changes. Identity forms through action, not intention. You don't need to feel like the person you want to become. You need to act like them, consistently. Every action reinforces or erodes the story you tell yourself. What is one small action you've been delaying until you feel ready? What would it look like to do it today? Take one identity-aligned action within the next 24 hours, even if it's small, awkward, or incomplete. Chapter 6. The Cost of False Identities. A mask, worn long enough, starts to feel like skin. Many people live behind layers they didn't choose, identities assigned by culture, family, past failures, or old wounds. These false identities are convincing because they've been worn for years. But deep down, they don't fit. And the longer you wear them, the more they cost. They cost clarity. You start confusing who you are with what you've been through. You say, "I'm anxious," when what you mean is, "I've felt anxiety." You say, "I'm not creative," when what you mean is, "I stopped trying years ago." False identities take a temporary emotion or circumstance and stretch it into a permanent definition. They cost confidence. When you believe a false story about yourself, your actions shrink to fit that narrative. You stop applying for opportunities because people like me don't get picked. You hold back from contributing because I'm not the kind of person who adds value. You play small, not because you're incapable, but because your script doesn't allow for anything more. And most of all, they cost change. Because as long as you're trying to build better habits on top of a broken self-concept, they won't last. You can't outperform the story you believe. A house built on sand eventually sinks, no matter how polished the walls are. Researchers at Stanford have studied a phenomenon called self-labeling, where people internalize the categories they place themselves in. Labels like addict, failure, or screw up may feel honest, but they also become prisons. When your identity is fused with your struggle, it becomes nearly impossible to separate progress from shame. Any attempt to grow feels like self-betrayal. You're not just changing behavior, you're challenging the mask. But what if you aren't what happened to you? What if your identity is not your failure, not your trauma, not your worst moment? There's a difference between ownership and over-identification. Ownership says, "That happened, and it shaped me." Over-identification says, "That happened, and it defines me." The first leads to healing. The second leads to paralysis. Letting go of false identities is uncomfortable, not because they're true, but because they're familiar. They've become the scaffolding we lean on, even when they hurt us. Like a limp that develops after an injury, the pattern persists long after the wound has healed. You don't notice how much it limits you until you try to run. But healing doesn't begin with changing behavior. It begins with naming the lie. That's the turning point. When you stop saying, "This is just who I am," and start asking, "Who told me that?" When you stop reinforcing a role and start reclaiming your authorship. You may not have chosen the old story, But you are the only one who can rewrite it. And that begins not with force, but with clarity. You were not born with a broken identity. You picked up pieces from places, people, and moments, some helpful, some harmful. And now, you get to examine what stays and what goes. That's not denial. That's wisdom. Choosing what to carry forward is one of the most powerful acts of self-respect you can make. Because until you release the false, the true can't take root. And once you do, even the smallest habit becomes something more than effort. It becomes evidence. False identities often stem from repeated pain, labels, or roles, not truth. You cannot build lasting change on top of a broken self-concept. Letting go of old narratives creates space for aligned action and real transformation. What identity have you worn for years that no longer serves who you're becoming? Write down one false identity you're ready to release. Then, write its opposite, and take a small action that aligns with the new story. Chapter 7: The Identity Loop. A compass doesn't need to shout to be trusted. It just points. Quietly. Consistently. And over time, it guides the traveler home. Your identity works the same way. It silently informs your choices, your preferences, your reactions. But what few realize is that identity doesn't just influence behavior. Behavior also shapes identity. They feed each other in a continuous loop. The identity loop begins with belief. That belief influences action. Those actions produce results. And the results reinforce the belief. Around and around it goes. For better or for worse. If someone believes they're unreliable, they tend to procrastinate. That procrastination leads to poor outcomes, which reinforces the belief. See, I can't be trusted with responsibility. The cycle tightens, and soon, it feels like truth. But it's not truth. It's repetition. On the flip side, when someone believes they're intentional, they take consistent actions. Those actions lead to meaningful outcomes. And those outcomes confirm the belief. I'm someone who shows up on purpose. The difference isn't personality. It's pattern. The loop reinforces what you allow it to start. What's powerful about the identity loop is that it can be interrupted. Not with grand gestures, but with small inputs. A single shift in action can begin rewriting belief. And a single upgrade in belief can change the lens through which you view every decision. This is the leverage point. You don't have to change the whole loop at once. You just have to insert truth where a lie once lived. Cognitive behavioral research has shown that changing thoughts alone can be helpful, but changing thoughts and actions creates far stronger outcomes. When people act in alignment with a new belief, even before they fully feel it, they begin to solidify a new loop. Identity doesn't require perfection. It requires participation. If your life feels stuck, it's often not because you lack discipline. It's because the loop hasn't been challenged. You're still living from a belief that was never examined, never chosen, just inherited. Maybe you were told you were difficult, or lazy, or average, and over time, your actions adapted to that story. But beliefs that were handed to you don't have to be held forever. The first break in the loop is awareness. Noticing the pattern. Seeing how belief leads to behavior leads to reinforcement. And once you see it, you can disrupt it. You don't need to feel confident to show up confidently. You don't need to believe you're focused to put your phone away. You don't need to think of yourself as disciplined to make your bed. These are micro disruptions. They begin to chip away at the old belief, not by shouting it down, but by starving it of evidence. With each action aligned to a new identity, you feed a different loop. And over time, that loop gains momentum. You go from asking, "What's wrong with me?" to stating, "This is who I am now." Not because you've forced it, but because you've lived it. You become what you repeat. And the loop always listens. So choose carefully what you believe. Choose intentionally what you do. Because whether consciously or not, your life is building a loop. Let it be one that carries you forward, not one that keeps you spinning in place. Identity and behavior reinforce each other in a continuous feedback loop. You don't need to fully believe a new identity to begin acting on it. Small, aligned actions are enough to disrupt and redirect the loop. What belief has been silently running your identity loop, and what would it look like to challenge it? Interrupt one negative loop today by doing something that reflects the identity you want, even if it feels unnatural. Chapter 8: When Identity Feels Fragile. A newly planted tree looks vulnerable. Thin branches, shallow roots, swaying in the slightest wind. But given time, it anchors deep. It bends without breaking. Strength isn't immediate, it's developed. Identity is no different. In the beginning, it feels fragile. This is the part most people don't prepare for. They expect clarity to feel like certainty. They think that once they've declared a new identity, I'm disciplined, I'm focused, I'm healthy, everything will fall into place. But new identity feels unfamiliar, awkward, even fake. That's not a sign of failure. That's the tension of growth. Every identity has to be tested before it's trusted. You might commit to becoming someone who honors time, only to oversleep your alarm the next day. You might decide you're someone who doesn't gossip, then find yourself mid-sentence repeating something you shouldn't. The reflex is to panic, to assume you're a fraud. But a fragile identity is not a false one. It's just young. Like a muscle, it grows through stress and repetition. The early days of transformation are where most people quit. Not because change is impossible, but because they misinterpret inconsistency as inauthenticity. They expect perfection and interpret every setback as proof that nothing has changed. But inconsistency doesn't invalidate identity. It's part of the process of making it real. A study from the British Journal of Health Psychology found that those who missed a day or two in a new habit still succeeded long-term, as long as they didn't abandon the effort altogether. In other words, what breaks most people isn't the slip. It's the shame that follows. Shame says, "You'll never change." Wisdom says, "Keep showing up." True identity change isn't a lightning strike. It's a slow layering of choices, repeated in the face of resistance. That's where the roots grow deep, not in perfect streaks, but in recovery. In choosing, again and again, to act in alignment with who you are becoming. And here's something crucial: a fragile identity still counts. A toddler wobbling on 2 feet is still walking. A sapling in the wind is still a tree. A writer with 1 paragraph is still a writer. Strength doesn't come before movement, it comes because of it. Every time you act in alignment with your chosen identity, even if it's shaky, you're strengthening its roots. The key is to protect what's forming. This means staying out of environments that contradict your new story. It means limiting voices that reinforce who you used to be. It means treating your identity not as a finished product, but as something sacred in progress. Just as you wouldn't expose a newborn plant to frost, you must be careful with a newly forming self-concept. It needs light, patience, space to grow. In time, what feels fragile becomes familiar. What once took effort becomes effortless. The actions that required discipline become instinct. But that shift only happens if you give yourself permission to be new without being perfect. Too many people abandon transformation because they feel like imposters in the beginning. But no one becomes something new without passing through the awkward middle. That discomfort isn't a warning sign. It's confirmation that you're on the edge of change. So if the new identity still feels fragile, that's okay. It means you're doing it right. New identities often feel fragile and unfamiliar, that's normal. Inconsistency is not failure, it's part of the formation process. The strength of identity comes from repetition, not perfection. Where are you mistaking early-stage growth for failure, and how can you reframe that tension as progress? Repeat one action today that supports your chosen identity, even if it feels awkward. Let it be small, but let it be done. Chapter 9: Environment is Identity's Echo. A song sounds different depending on the room it's played in. The same melody can feel rich in a cathedral and hollow in a hallway. Environment shapes perception. And in the same way, your surroundings amplify, or distort, your identity. You may think of identity as internal, but it's constantly interacting with what's around you. The people you spend time with, the routines you follow, the objects in your space, they all echo back a message: this is who you are. The problem isn't always motivation. Sometimes, it's that the environment speaks louder than your intention. You can declare yourself focused, but if your desk is cluttered with distractions, that identity has to fight to survive. You can decide to become healthy, but if your kitchen counters preach convenience over nourishment, your actions won't support your new story. Willpower alone can only do so much. Even the strongest identities erode when placed in a setting that contradicts them. A study published in Annual Review of Psychology found that nearly half of our daily behaviors are driven by context, not conscious decision-making. That means your environment is often making choices on your behalf. If it's not designed to support who you want to become, it will keep pulling you back to who you used to be. This is why true identity change often requires an environmental shift. Not necessarily a dramatic one, but an intentional one. You shape your space, and your space shapes you. Every visible object, every repeated cue, every social interaction becomes a vote for or against the identity you're trying to build. Consider a person who wants to become a reader. Leaving books in plain sight, carrying one in a bag, or ending the day with 5 quiet minutes changes the environment to invite that identity. Or someone who wants to become financially mindful, setting up automatic savings, unsubscribing from marketing emails, or tracking spending doesn't just organize behavior. It reinforces belief. I'm someone who handles money wisely. Environment isn't limited to the physical. It includes digital spaces too. The apps on your phone, the accounts you follow, the notifications you allow, all speak into your daily rhythm. If your digital environment pulls you toward distraction or comparison, it undermines even your best self-concept. Social environment might be the most powerful of all. If the people closest to you don't reflect the values you're building, their influence can quietly chip away at your progress. You might not notice it at first. But over time, the friction grows. It's not about judgment. It's about alignment. Who you spend time with is one of the clearest predictors of who you become. You don't have to eliminate every obstacle overnight. You just need to make sure your surroundings aren't sending mixed messages. Ask, does this space support who I want to be? Does this relationship align with the identity I'm building? Do these routines reflect the story I'm writing? When the answer is yes, identity feels natural. Like a song in a room built for sound. Change doesn't always start from within. Sometimes, it starts by rearranging what's outside, so the inside has permission to grow. And when environment echoes identity, habits stop feeling like resistance and start feeling like rhythm. Your environment constantly reinforces, or resists, your chosen identity. Many behaviors are driven by cues in your surroundings, not conscious thought. Shaping your space, digitally and physically, can make identity alignment easier. What part of your environment is quietly contradicting the person you're becoming? Identify one environmental key you can change today. Remove a distraction, add a reminder, or shift a routine to support your identity. Chapter 10. Becoming is never final. A photograph captures a moment. It freezes light, posture, and expression into a frame that feels complete. But people are not photographs. They are motion pictures, constantly evolving, frame by frame, often changing so gradually they don't notice until they look back. Identity, too, is never final. It's not a destination to arrive at, but a direction to walk in. And yet, many people treat identity like a fixed state, something they either have or don't. I'm just not the type to stick with things. I've never been a morning person. That's not who I am. These phrases feel safe because they make the world predictable. But in truth, they limit potential. You're not meant to be a static snapshot. You're a story in motion. We all crave certainty, and identity offers a form of it. When we define ourselves, we make decisions easier. We reduce ambiguity. But that clarity can become a cage. What once gave structure can start to suffocate if we forget that becoming is a lifelong process, not a finished product. This misunderstanding leads to two extremes. Some people cling tightly to an outdated identity, even when it no longer fits. They keep showing up as who they were out of fear of who they might become. Others constantly chase new identities, never anchoring long enough to let roots grow. Both are forms of resistance, one to change, the other to commitment. But growth lives in the middle. It's the willingness to hold identity loosely enough to evolve, but firmly enough to act with intention. It's being rooted, not rigid. Anchored, not anchored down. Neuroscience supports this truth. The brain's capacity for change, known as neuroplasticity, continues throughout life. You're not locked into your traits, preferences, or patterns. New beliefs can form. New behaviors can take hold. New identities can emerge. Your brain is not waiting for you to finish, it's wired for you to continue. This means the person you are today is not the limit of who you can be tomorrow. The identity you've built up to now doesn't have to define your next chapter. In fact, one of the most courageous things you can do is outgrow your own narrative. Not because it was wrong, but because you've reached the edge of it. It served its season. Now it's time to turn the page. And this is not failure. This is maturity. A tree doesn't apologize for growing past the space it once fit. A river doesn't explain when it shifts direction. Change is not betrayal. It's proof that you're alive. The irony of identity work is that the more you define who you are, the more you must remain open to who you're still becoming. That doesn't mean living in confusion. It means living with curiosity. Instead of asking, "Is this who I am?" begin asking, "What might be possible next?" Because identity isn't an answer, it's a question you keep living into. You'll never arrive at a final version of yourself. Not because you're broken, but because you're designed to expand. There's always more depth to discover, more strength to uncover, more alignment to live into. The work doesn't end. But it gets lighter, truer, more fluid. Becoming is not about reaching a place. It's about walking a path. And the path is the point. Identity is not static, it's a continual unfolding process. Clinging to a fixed self-concept can block growth and limit potential. True transformation happens when you stay committed to becoming, not arriving. Where have you confused a past version of yourself with a permanent one? Write down one identity you've outgrown, and one new possibility you're ready to explore, even if it's uncertain. Chapter 11: Identity First, Habits Forever. A single domino, when aligned, can knock over another twice its size. With enough momentum, one small piece sets off a chain reaction powerful enough to move mountains. The same is true of identity. Once it's aligned, even the smallest habit can trigger transformation far beyond its size. By now, you've seen that change doesn't start with effort. It starts with alignment. Not with trying to become someone else, but with stepping fully into the person you were always capable of being. You don't chase discipline, you become someone who does disciplined things. You don't force creativity, you practice seeing yourself as a creator. The action flows naturally from the identity. And that's the secret to making it last. When people struggle to maintain habits, it's not because they lack commitment. It's because they're trying to build a structure on top of an unstable foundation. Without identity, habits feel like chores. With identity, they become confirmations. Evidence. Reassurance that you are, in fact, becoming who you said you were. This is what most behavior change models miss. They focus on outcomes: how much weight was lost, how many words were written, how much money was saved. But results are side effects. Identity is the cause. When your habits serve the person you believe you are, they become sustainable. They aren't battles to be won each day. They're expressions of alignment. But identity isn't something you declare once and forget. It must be maintained, lived into, protected. The world will try to pull you back into old labels. Disappointment will whisper that you haven't changed. Distraction will tempt you to drift. That's why your habits aren't just behaviors. They're anchors. They tether you to your truest self when the current gets strong. Every morning you get to cast votes. Small, quiet, ordinary choices that affirm the story you're writing. You make the bed. You take the walk. You write the page. These aren't impressive. That's the point. They're ordinary enough to repeat, and repeated enough to become part of you. In time, the evidence stacks up. The voice of doubt gets quieter. The pull of old patterns weakens. You stop asking, "Can I really become this kind of person?" and start answering, "I already am." That shift doesn't just change your behavior. It rewrites your story. And that's the work you've been doing all along, not just building better habits, but building a better home inside yourself. One that no longer lives in tension between who you are and who you want to be. One where actions match values. Where identity isn't fragile, it's rooted. Lived. Proven. You'll still have off days. You'll still forget. But now you have a compass. A path. A core that doesn't sway with circumstance. Because you're not chasing habits anymore. You're embodying identity. This is what it means to grow from the inside out. It's not flashy. It's not instant. But it lasts. So return to the root. Ask the question again and again. Who am I becoming? Let that guide your next choice. Let that fuel your next step. Let that form the habits that follow you for life. Because when identity comes first, habits don't have to be forced. They become forever. Long-lasting habits are built on identity, not willpower. Habits confirm who you are when aligned with your self-concept. The true goal isn't behavior change, it's becoming someone for whom change is natural. What identity are you now ready to fully own, and what small action will you use to prove it today? Take one final, deliberate action that confirms your new identity, and begin your forever habits from there. Take care and be well.